Today we're going to be talking about some basic hitches that you'll need to know as a climber, but before we do that, let's review some vocabulary and concepts. Today I'm going to be using this rope which has a blue section fused to a red section, and this is so that you can see what's going on inside the hitch, but I'll also be tying with a basic green climbing rope so you can see it in real-world application. We talk about the working end of a rope. Usually it's the end of the rope that we're tying a knot to, and the standing end of the rope is what's going on behind the knot. But for our hitches today, we'll generally be working in the middle of the rope in a section of a rope that we'll call a bight. And a bight generally just refers to a portion of the rope between the two ends. It can also be used to refer to a bend or a loop in the middle of the rope. So we'll talk about closed loops, and I typically close my loops with the working strand below the standing strand, and then an open loop just wouldn't have the strands crossed over. We'll still be talking about setting our hitches properly so we can inspect them and make sure that they're tied correctly. We'll be showing you alternate ways to tie these hitches as well as the incorrect ways so you can see what they look like when they're incorrect. And we're going to be talking about hitches today, which are different from knots. Knots are when a cord or rope is tied to itself. But a hitch requires something else to be tied to. So in this case we're going to be using a carabiner as our hitching post. But you might also be using your harness to hitch to, or something else like a tree. Without the thing that you tie your hitches to, your hitches will often just fall apart. So that's a big difference there. So let's get started. So the first hitch that most people learn is called the girth hitch or the basket hitch, and it's super versatile. It's used to take an existing loop of rope and securely fasten it to another object. Oftentimes you will be girth hitching things to your harness so that you can clip them to something else. But I'm going to demonstrate on this carabiner. So I've got a closed loop of rope here. This is my prusik loop, and I'm going to take one end of this loop and I'm going to wrap it around my hitching post, and then I'm going to bring the other end through that loop. And when I draw it closed, I get a nice symmetrical hitch that can't come undone. Now, I may care about where this knot ends up depending on what I'm going to do with it. So if I want to control where the knot's going to end up, I can position it closer to the post and bring the rest of the loop through. And now that knot is out of the way if I want to do something else with the other end of the rope. This works equally well with webbing or slings. Again, where that sewn portion of the sling ends up can make a difference on how well the girth hitch works out. So you want to be careful not to have it kind of wrapped right over the edge of the carabiner, otherwise you might not get a solid connection. The clove hitch is a super handy hitch to know. It's often used as an adjustable attachment point from the rope to an anchor. So if you're multi-pitch climbing, you arrive at the anchor, you want to quickly clip in. This is a great hitch to use. All you need is a locking carabiner and the rope that you're already tied to, and you can adjust your position away from the anchor very quickly and easily. As you can see, it's two closed loops clipped to the carabiner. The way this is tied, I make one closed loop with the working end on the bottom there. I make another closed loop with the working end on the bottom, and then I'm going to bring the one that's closer to me in front of the other one. Bring that in front, clip both loops, and as I set that hitch, you can see it comes nice. You got two loops up against the carabiner, ropes crossing over each other in between them, and that's going to create the friction that's going to hold you in place. So if I'm connected to the red strand here, that's going to hold me in place there. But if I need more or less rope, I can feed slack into the hitch, pull it out the other side, and now I'm closer to the anchor. Or if I need to get farther away from the anchor, I can introduce more slack, pull it through, and now I'm farther away. Now you have to set this knot pretty tightly. If it is not set, it's not really giving its holding power there, right? So we're going to make sure we set that nice and tight. It does have the ability to slide around quite a bit and interact with the gate, so we're going to make sure we use a locking carabiner that's locked. Another consideration is where that load is happening on the carabiner, and when I clip that in, I'm going to make sure that the load strand, the working strand, is towards the back of the carabiner, so it's loading more in line with the spine rather than on the gate. Let's take a look at some incorrect ways of tying that. If I make my loops correctly but fail to cross them over, you'll see what I end up with is just simply a wrap around the carabiner. That's not really doing much for me. If I make my loops in different ways, right? So now when I cross them over, again I end up with just a wrap. If I make my loops in different ways and cross them differently, still just a wrap. So it's pretty easy to tell when this one's tied correctly. Close loop, crossover, clip, tighten. Now let's take a look at that. My climbing rope. I'm actually tied into my harness here. I arrive at the anchor, make my two loops, cross over. I'm clipping my side, the strand going towards me, against the spine of the carabiner, tightening it up. I've got too much rope here, so I'm going to pull in all the slack so that it's nice and tight up against me, and then pull the rest of the rope back through the hitch. Set, locked, and because this has a tendency to interact with the gate, I'm going to make sure that I use a secondary anchor, and that's the Clove Hitch. The Munter Hitch is an extremely useful hitch to know in case of emergencies. It is a sliding knot that provides enough friction in the system that you can use it in place of a rappel or belay device. It does such a good job at this that the International Climbing and Mountaineering Federation, the UIAA, has approved this as a belay method. To tie the Munter Hitch, you're going to create a closed loop, create a second closed loop, and now you're going to fold them into each other and clip those two loops. When you set it, you should get one strand of rope free and one strand captured by a loop of rope. Now, as you pull the rope through, you'll notice the rope is making a lot of bends and rubbing up against itself. That's creating the friction that you need. If you pull it in the other direction, you'll watch the knot roll over itself through the carabiner, and now we can pull the rope in the other direction. So it can be loaded in either direction, which is pretty cool. But it does need sufficient room to roll through the carabiner. So if I was to tie this with the carabiner pointing in the other direction, you'll notice that the knot has a hard time getting through the carabiner. So you'll want to use a parabiner or what's called an HMS carabiner. HMS is actually a shortened version of a German word which means Munter Hitch. So make sure you want a wide carabiner. Also, because this is a life-saving operation, belaying or rappelling, you're going to want to make sure you have a locking carabiner as well. So, clipped, locked, and now you can belay or rappel. Now, there are plenty of ways to tie the Munter hitch incorrectly, and just like in the other knot, it's good to inspect your knot or hitch before you put it into use. So if I was to make my loops in an opposite way and clip them, when I draw it together, I'm in trouble. So that's clearly not what I'm looking for. If I make one loop and the other loop and I twist them against each other, I get looks like a girth hitch. So again, closed loop, a second closed loop in the same way, cross them into each other, and you want to make sure that what you got is something that will lock under load. So as I pull this strand, you'll see that it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to hold it in place. So the climber over here can be held by the belayer, or if I'm rappelling, this strand would be up above and I can lower down or hold myself in place. Now this is by no means an assisted braking knot. This requires a brake hand on the brake strand at all times, and if you're going to hold your climber in place, make sure they weight the rope, allow it to roll over onto the correct side so that you can then hold them in place without that knot rolling through the carabiner. Alright, let's look at the Munter hitch using the dynamic rope as if I was bringing up a second on a multi-pitch climb. I might get to the anchor, clip in, and then pull up all the rope until I get to my climber. I hear them call out to me, and now I'm ready to put them on belay. So I'm going to make a loop, make another loop, face them into each other, lock the carabiner, and now I have them on belay. So one last note on the Clove and the Munter hitches. If you were paying attention, you can tie them from the same starting point with these two closed loops. So I'm going to make one loop, make a second loop. For the Clove hitch, I'm going to cross over and clip. And for the Munter, same starting point. Instead of crossing over, I will just bring them into each other and clip. And then we've got our Munter. So that's pretty handy to know. And now I'm going to show you an alternate way of tying those when you only have one hand to do it. In this case, I've tied myself to the green rope. I've gotten to the anchor, and I need to tie a clove hitch to secure myself. I'm going to make a back clip and then reach over, grab a loop and twist it up into the carabiner, and I've got myself a clove hitch. I can lock that, I can adjust it till I'm nice and snug, back it up with a second anchor, and then for my munter, I'm going to pull up all the ropes for my climber, and now I can make a regular clip, and I can do that same loop, twist, and bring it up into the carabiner. And I've got myself my munter. It's fun learning new ways to tie the same knot, so that if you